from the year 1991. This is the last talk we have from the Rebbe from the Parsha Shoftim. The Rebbe suffered a stroke in 1992 in the winter. So this is the last talk on Parsha Shoftim. Let's bring up the text here. Do you see the text, Barbara?
Yes, Rabbi.
All right, so Sicha Shabbos Parsha Shoftim Zayin El, the 7th of El, Tafshin Nun Tinase, which is the Rashi Tevis for Tafshin Nun Aleph, 1991. In connection with the commandment of this week's opening commandment to this week's Parsha that says, Shoftim v'shotrim titin l'cha b'chol she'arecha. You should place judges and enforcers or police at the gates of your cities. Yeshnoi hayiyud shel navi Geulah. We have a prophecy from, or an assurance from the prophet of redemption, which is Yeshaya. Hashiva Shofteinu k'varishoina v'yetzarech. That Yeshaya says, and I'm going to return your judges as they were before, and your advisors as they were in the beginning. As we say in the prayer every morning, every day, 3 times a day in the Shemona Esrei, Bimei Achol, in the weekdays, we say Hashiva Shofteinu k'varishoina v'yatzenu k'vatchila. Return our judges as they were in the beginning, and our advisors, the Yoatzim, from an advisor as they were in the beginning. So Rishona means from the start, from the word Rishon, and k'vatchila means from the beginning. And the Rebbe says, 1991, the Rebbe is talking very strongly about redemption. And Mashiach is coming. We only have to do one, just open our eyes to see Mashiach. So the Rebbe says, as we've spoken many times, and specifically lately, about the proclamation and the information we got from my father-in-law, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, the head of the generation, that the Friedrich Rebbe says, the alter l'tshuva, the Friedrich Rebbe said this in 1944, that the sooner you do tshuva, uvemela l'alter the Geulah, then we will go soon into redemption.
How come the PDF file that looks like a box isn't there? There's a circle, and then I click on it, it doesn't open, it doesn't work. It says downloading, and then it never completes.
I don't know, but there's the link. You could push the link.
I pushed the link on my phone. I got it on the phone. I like to do you on the phone and another thing on the computer.
But the email should have
It has a circular thing. It had that last week too, but the circular thing doesn't work as good as the square, the one that looks like a folder PDF file.
I think that would be a setting in your computer. That's not the sender, because we haven't changed the file style. It's all PDF, so it could be something updated in your computer that doesn't have.
No, because I was just on Zoom with something. Anyway, forget it. Okay,
so the Rebbe says, based on what we said before, that l'alter l'tshuva alter Geulah, that the sooner we do tshuva, the sooner we're going to have redemption. Shekvar saimu es hakol. The Rebbe said we've completed everything already. Gam tzich kaftarim. We even shine the buttons. You know, when a person's getting ready to really present him or herself, so you make yourself look perfect, and you even kind of shine the buttons to make yourself look fresh and shiny. So Mashiach has already shined the buttons. What's lacking is we all have to stand together ready to receive Mashiach. And the Rebbe says we already finished that, to be ready to receive Mashiach. The Kabul Pnei Mashiach Tzidkenu, to receive the Mashiach, the righteous Mashiach, take it mamish immediately. Moving. So the Rebbe says from this understood that we're already holding mamish ready for Mashiach. We've shined the buttons, we've done tshuva, we're ready for Geulah, we're ready even to receive Mashiach. I'm talking 1991. So therefore we're holding now. At the time that we're ready for the prophecy to happen of Hashiva Shofteinu, that God should return the judges and should return those who advise. It shouldn't just be that we have the judges, but we have them the way they were from the beginning. And it's already started. And the Rebbe is learning from the playing with the word kibatchila, not as it was in the beginning, but we are at the beginning. Kidakaman, as the Rebbe will explain. To understand exactly what we're talking about, we have to analyze actually the prophecy of Yeshaya. So that he says like this. In the pasuk he says, in this week's parsha, when we talk about the commandment of setting up a judicial system, we have two levels. We have Shoftim v'Shotrim, police and enforcers. Meaning like Shoftim is the judges and Shotrim are the police. Titin l'cha you should have in the cities. When it comes to the prophecy, in this week's parsha, we talk about that in order to have the rule of law, you have to have both the judges and the enforcers to make sure that they keep the judgment. But in the prophecy of Yeshaya, it only mentions the judges. It doesn't mention the police. But instead, we add something else. The Yoatzim, those who are their advisors, so to say. So the question is why? Why doesn't the prophet keep to the system of the Torah? Which means Hashiva, that God should return the judges and the police or the enforcers. Why does he omit the word of V'shoitrim, and he adds Yetzayach, your advisors? Beis, the second question the Rebbe asks, Mahim shnei yanim de Shoftayach v'Yetzayach. What is the difference between a judge and an advisor? Gimel, Madua nemer b'Shoftayach halashin kivarishayna v'Yetzayach kibatchila. Why, in the specific Hebrew term, we say that the Yeshaya Navi says that he's going to read that in the coming of Mashiach, the judges are going to be returned kibar rishona in the beginning. So the word rishona in the onset, and v'yotzayich your advisors kibatchila in the beginning. There's the word Rosh also means the head, like we talk always about Rosh Hashanah, and Chilas Hashanah, the beginning of the year. And also, why is it talking in, so to say, in the present? Shoftayach, your judges, your advisors, instead of just saying the idea of judges and advisors in the plural. Stop. It says to give it to you. So in the beginning it says, in the prophecy it says, your judges, your advisors. And in this week's parsha it says, judges and police to be given to you. Okay, the Rebbe is just analyzing the differences between the psukim. So the Rebbe continues, one could say the idea is like this. What is the difference between having the judges and the enforcers? That Shoftim dayanim hapoiskin asadin. The job of a judge is to set the law. This is the judgment. This is what has to happen. And what is the job of the Shotrim? Haroidin esa'am achar mitzvasan shemakin v'koifsin v'makul b'rtzu achi kabel avastin ha'shofet. The judge of the Shoter of the police is that they guide the people and they command them, and if they have to, they use force until they accept the judgment of the judge. The judge's job is not to enforce the law, but to give the law. The enforcers of the law, that's the Shotrim. Zoysemeris, that means the job of the Shoter, of the police, is to be forceful and to force the people to keep the law or the judgment of the judge, right? If a judge gives a judge and has no ability to enforce the law, then it's just an idea. But when there's a police system or the court ruler that makes sure that there's the bailiff that makes sure that what happens has to happen, so then they actualize what the ruling is. So he says, based on this, we'll understand that when it comes to the days of Mashiach, there's going to be basically no more evil and no more necessity to enforce the law. You're just going to have to know what the law is. So therefore, the prophet says that there's going to be a return of the judges. V'lo doesn't mention the enforcers, the police. Why? Because when the Mashiach comes, all evil and the evil inclination will no longer exist. And the necessity for the enforcers is only a person who doesn't want to obey the law. If you don't know what the ruling is, so you need a judge to tell you the ruling. It's okay to be confused or not to be, it's to lack the knowledge of the ruling. That's the judge's job. But the only necessity for the enforcer is that the people don't want to accept the judgment. But when Mashiach comes, and where does it come from? That a person would not want to accept the judgment is that you're giving into your evil inclination. But if the evil inclination doesn't exist, there's no longer necessity for the enforcer. There's no longer necessity for the police or for the enforcers that they're going to, so to say, enforce the people. That they have to listen by force to the ruling of the judge. Because if you don't have evil and you're all good, so automatically all you need is the guidance of the judge, and you're going to behave accordingly. Therefore, we only need the judges. That they're going to give the psak, they're going to give the ruling, and tell us what does Hashem tell us to do in every situation. So when we have doubt or in extra teachings, the judge will be the one that informs us. And once we're informed, automatically that's what we're going to do. And in ways that we can get more and more information, rise higher and higher within holiness itself. The Rebbe says, one could say, and the Rebbe says this is a hint also, that although the first word of the parsha is Shoftim, is judge, but hypothetically, we could have named the parsha police and judges and polices, because both of them are mentioned in the parsha. But we call the parsha of judges. Why? Because that's the main thing. The enforcer is only there to enforce the law. It's only there because there's a problem, that the people won't listen. We know that when we call something, a name of a parsha, the name itself gives us insight to what's the main idea of the parsha. And this idea that a name gives us insight applies to the parsha as well. And they're very exact. So one could ask the question, if the commandment is that in order for the system to work, one has to have police and enforcers. So why would we name the parsha just about judges and enforcers? Why would we just mention the parsha about the judges and not mention the enforcers? Both of them are needed in order to carry out the law. One to inform us the law, one to make sure the law happens. Our Medrash teaches us. If you don't have an enforcer, there's no point of a judge. If the ruling is that the Bezdin says that one so-and-so is obligated to pay someone else X amount of money in a dispute, if there's not going to be the enforcer that's going to act on the ruling that says that you have to pay what so-and-so says, what the judge says, so once the person walks out of court, there's going to be no way for the judge to enforce the law. So therefore, without a police, there's no power to the judge. So the answer is, why do we call the parsha Shoftim, and we don't call the parsha judges and polices, if they're so connected and so dependent on each other, right? The police also is dependent on the judge. The police is only here to enforce the law of the judge. So the answer is, because the main thing is just the judge, to know the law. Because we have a problem that people may not listen to the judge, so the enforcer is there to help the judge, but the main thing is the judgment. The only reason we need the enforcer is in the situation where the judgment was not going to, or the judge won't be able to actualize the ruling, so because the person won't listen. So therefore, we need police. Bali Michael Virtual, like it says in the Torah, people that have a stick and basically a stick and a whip. The stick and the whip makes sure that the person is going to listen to the judge. Shiachrichus Bal Hadin, that enforces the person who's going to the court. Shikabelavas in a mishayfet, to listen to the judge, the ruling. Therefore, the emphasis is not about the police; it's only about the judges. Because the idea that the Torah is really telling us is that a person has to have judges in every city to give us the rule of the law. But because we're dealing with human beings, and human beings not always will listen to the law, so the part of the system has to have that there has to be also enforcers. That's only because there's a weakness among society. And therefore the Rebbe says in the minyan of mitzvahs, when you count the mitzvahs, because to set up judges is a mitzvah. It's one of the 613. But to have polices is not. Why? Because the police are just a byproduct, so to say, of the judges. It's included in the obligation to have a judge, because a judge needs the police to enforce the law. So therefore, part of the way to set up a proper judicial system is that the judges have the enforcers to enforce the law. Because the idea of the police is only a detail in the system of the judicial system of the law. That's the police that actualize the law. It means they make sure that the people perform according to the ruling. But hypothetically, as far as it's only a necessity because of corruption or weakness amongst us. But the idea that to know what the ruling is means there's two things over here. There's lack of information. What is the law in such and such a case where someone says this and someone says that, where someone does this, or whatever the situation is that the judge has to rule? We have to know what the Torah says. So the Torah says you have to have judges to give us insight of what is the Torah ruling in this situation. And the only thing is that in order to enforce the law, you have to have enforcers. In theory, to know what the law is, you don't need the police. You just need the judge. When things are in order, like the way they will be in the days of Mashiach, where there's no longer necessity, there's no longer a fear that people won't listen to the law. This is why the commandment adds in the Torah police, because the Torah is talking about old times. It's talking about all situations where there will be people that, if not for the enforcers, won't listen to the law. Therefore, in this week's parsha, we add that in order for the judge's rulings to go into effect, there has to be a system of the police. Because sometimes there's going to have to be force or at least knowing that there is a force is alone a reason why a person will listen to the judge, the law. Not that you need the police in order for the judge to give judgment, but only that the police should help actualize the judgment of the judge. Because without the police, no one's going to listen to the ruling, or possibly won't listen. And from this we'll understand. So this only answers one question on Yeshaya Hanavi. Yeshaya Hanavi says in the days of Mashiach, Hashiva Shofteinu, that there's only going to be the judges, because there's no longer going to be a necessity of Yoatzim, of Shofetim, of police, because people will listen to the law. So, but this will understand why in the prophecy they add the Yoatzim, the advisors, as an addition to the judges. In theory, there should just be an omission of the necessity of police, of the police system, and just say that when Mashiach comes, the judges will return. Why do we have to add in the place of the police the advisors? So the Rebbe explains, Kivan, Sheshlemus HaKoyach Lekach, Shabegeulah Yeh B'nei Yisrael B'Shlemus V'Yikayim V'Sayros HaShoftim L'Leitzarich B'Shoitrim U'Mizeh Sheyeh Shoftach V'Gam Yotzach. He says, in order for the Jewish people to be able to, in the days of Mashiach, and this is where the Rebbe is going to get into the Sicha, that they're going to be able to be elevated, that all they need is the rule of the judge, and no longer a necessity for the police, is because with the judges will be advisors. But the question is, what's that mean? What does it mean that as a sign or a strength to elevate the people, to no longer be in a situation of requiring a policing system, to addition to the judge, there'll be advisors. So the Rebbe explains. Again, we have, just to put it in summary, we have the opening of this week's parasha that says the law that there has to be judges and police in the cities. We have the prophecy when Mashiach comes from Yeshaya that Hashiva Shofteinu that Mashiach comes, the judges and the advisors will be returned. It omits the necessity for police, like the Rebbe explains. We no longer will need policing in the days of Mashiach. However, it adds the advisor. So the question is, what's this addition of advisor? So we have to assume that the advisor, just like the police, is a way to help, so to say, enforce the ruling of the judge. So too the advisors are there to elevate the people, to not require the policing, to listen to the judge. This is what the Rebbe is going to explain. What's the difference between when you have a judge and an advisor? There's a distance between the judge and the person being judged. So the person is going to, here's a case, here's a question, is going to give the law, the ruling. There's no relationship, and there shouldn't be a relationship between the judge and the person being judged, or the subject being judged. He has to have total recuse himself from any kind of to be having a connection to the case personally. Otherwise, it's a clouding. It's in a cloud of the judge's judgment. The judge is much higher, so to say, than the person or the thing being judged. A has more information, knows the ruling. You don't know the ruling. The judge does know the ruling. And not only in general knowledge, but also the knowledge of the specifics of the case, of the rulings. And also, there's a distance because the person being judged or receiving judgment from the judge has to nullify himself or herself to whatever the judge is going to say. You're mevatel yourself. So there's this great distance, and this is a very little, so to say, personal relationship between the judge and the person being judged. Why? Because even if the person being judged is not happy with the ruling, you nullify. You're not just listening to hear what you want to hear. You have to listen what the law is. So you're nullifying yourself to say whatever the judge is going to say. I'm submitting myself to the rule of the judge. And when the judge gives the judgment, he doesn't say it in a kind way. He doesn't say it in a way kind of, I think we should do this. He says, this is the ruling. It has to be clean cut, raw. This is what we have to say. This is what we have to do. In a way of a gezerah, like a decree. It's all above down. And the person being judged has to accept it like a person accepts the yoke of a king. This is the ruling, no questions. Whether you like it or don't like it, whether you understand it or don't understand it. When you go to a judge, you can't say, well, I don't understand the ruling. One of the conditions is whatever the judge is going to tell you, because the judge knows more, both in information and in general how to approach a situation like this, and is able to not be an agebedaver, to not have an agenda here, and to be totally disconnected to the case. Right? What's the whole story of Rabbi Shmuel, who said that just because a woman came and brought an egg as a gift a day earlier, he can no longer be a judge because he can no longer be partial. So that's the idea of a judge. A judge has a relationship of disconnect from the person being judged. When it comes to an advisor is someone who has a personal relationship. You're relying on them. You're trusting them. The idea of an advisor, why do you have an advisor, is someone to give you good advice, that you trust that this person has your interest. So there's a total difference between an advisor and a judge. A good idea. That the person giving advice is at a level that has a connection where the person who's listening to the advice feels comfortable and relies on this person and relies that his advice has his back or her back. And there's a connection between the person who's listening to advice and the person giving the advice. And it doesn't talk above down. You're not interested in an advisor talking down to you, but talks as a friend, a yedid tov, a good friend, that's talking equally, shava b'shava. V'nois in line gives he or her an idea, eitza tova, keitza lisnag. This is how I suggest you should do this. You should deal with the situation. That not only that when the person listening to advice understands that this is good advice and understands this is good for me, and the advice is coming from a good place. So again, the difference between an advisor and a judge is mamish from one opposite to the next. A person can't talk in such a way, and that the relationship between the person giving advice and the person receiving advice, other than it's like a person giving a decree. It's not why you get an advisor to give you a decree. I'm breaking. And he says this is also the connection The difference between why when Yeshaya Navi says Mashiach comes, that God is going to return the judges and the advisors. When it comes to Torah mitzvahs, means usually the advisor gives you advice, let's say, in business or in relationships, etc. But here we're talking about in the system of doing Torah mitzvahs. So there's an idea that when someone talks to someone in Torah mitzvahs, you could say, this is the law. This is what you have to do. It's kosher. It's not kosher. Go to shul. Don't go to shul. Stop behaving this way, etc. And then there's a person who talks to you. You hear what they're saying. That the law comes in a way of an eitzah, or the advice, not as a command. And the Rebbe says both are necessary. There's a plus to the idea of a judge, and there's a plus an idea of an advisor. What's obviously the advice, the mila, so to say, the unique relationship, or from that, when a person gets advice, the person who receives it accepts it better. When a person gives it in a way of understanding, advice, closeness, relationship, this person cares for you. So it's much easier for you to take and receive what the person's telling you. And therefore, it penetrates the inner core of the person. There's no pushback. It doesn't have that reaction that you have when someone's telling you to do something. You understand and you trust and you know this person to have your back and to care for you, and therefore you're able to internalize the advice that this person is giving you. Because one thing's for sure, the only reason you took this person, he or she, as an advisor, because they have your interest. So what they're advising you is for your best interest. So even if you initially don't understand it, you're going to try to understand it. Because for sure one thing, this is what's best for me. That's what's unique and that's what's special. And that's the plus of an advisor, that you can internalize it. You have a trust, you have a relationship with the advisor, therefore you internalize the advice itself. What's the mile of the shofet? What the Rebbe is saying over here is not just that it's the person who's giving the information over, let's say that whether it's the advisor or the judge, but there's who the person is. You have the relationship you have with that person, and because the relationship you have with that person, it's that whatever is being told to you is for your benefit, and therefore you internalize it. You want to connect to that idea, even if you don't initially understand it. What's the idea? What's special about a judge? Because on the contrary, the person who's giving you this ruling or the idea is specifically above you, not on your level. So therefore, there's this clarity that the judge has, because he's not connected to you, but to just tell you, this is what the Torah says. Sometimes you have to hear raw, even if it's harsh. This is what the Torah says. I'm not talking to you because I'm your friend, and I'm not talking to you because because I'm trying to do what's best for you. You ask me the law, this is the law. And because of that, there's an asinas koyach, and the Rebbe says that because that's the relationship, that's about the law, what does the Torah demand? There's a certain intuition, what we call b'siyata d'shmaya, there's a certain koyach, a certain strength the judge has to make sure to say the right idea. I mean, the Yoatzim may not be giving the right advice also, but because the judge is connecting to what does the Torah say, what's the law say, there's a concept of siyata d'shmaya, of a godly power that a Rav has, a judge has, a Rav has, to give the right psak. I think there's a story, in Nod Yehuda. I think it was the Nod Yehuda who said once that, I don't know, how did you know? He says, I didn't know. But I knew that whenever I say I'm only trying to say the law of the Torah. I'm not sure if I'm saying the story right, but I think the idea is right. And therefore I had siyata d'shmaya. I think it was the Nod Yehuda when he was tested. Sorry, this is what it was. He said there was the Nod Yehuda was being tested to be the Rav of Prague. Prague was like a very respectable job. So they asked him a few questions, and one question wasn't a real question. It wasn't because So he said, I don't know the answer. So he said, but I'll tell you, it's not a real question. So they said, how do you know it's not a real question? He says, because if it's a real question, I would have God's power, the siyata d'shmaya, God's strength, to know what I'm supposed to tell you. But if I don't have that strength, it means it's not important, because it's not true. It's not a real question. So there's an idea that a judge has this kind of a higher power. And also because there's a distance, sometimes a person has to hear it. This is the law. And so, not to try to manipulate or not to try to use a relationship to hear what you want to hear. But you have to hear harsh words. Sometimes this is the ruling, above, down. And because when it comes to advice, you can kind of say, okay, I'll listen to your advice. I won't listen to your advice. When the person says, this is the ruling, this is the ruling. There's no compromise. The Rebbe says, in other words, when it comes to the judge, the main idea is that this is a judge, and he's giving you over. He's the main, so to say, authority in the conversation. It's all about the judge, and what the judge says, you have to listen. It's not about you. But when it comes to advice, the main emphasis is on the person receiving the advice. It's all about because the person feels comfortable and knows the person and trusts the person. So he's a receptacle. She's a receptacle to the advice. So the emphasis is on the person receiving the advice. That person's more receptacle to listening and to internalizing the message. So the focus is on the person receiving the information and the person giving the information. And the Rebbe says in general, this is the way a person has to go about their service of Hashem. There's avodah sa'adam koach atzmai. This is what we have to do with our own strength. Hashem gives each one of us strengths and abilities to serve Him. It's called koach atzmai, your own strength to, so to say, to utilize the unique tools that God gave you to serve Him, which we call in the words the Chassidus asirusa delatata, an awakening from below. What does it mean, an awakening from below? Because you have tools. Everyone has tools to use, to utilize, to serve Hashem. And then there's hasiyua milmaila. This is how things come from above. It's God who gives us, so to say, help. It's not because it's God who empowers us. Although the tools were given to us by God, but it was given to us to choose. Then there's sometimes kind of a higher power, even above the tools that are given to us, which is called asirusa delayla, an awakening from above. Like a person gets an inspiration for tshuva. Not because you worked for it. God decided that this person, I want to inspire this person to do tshuva. And the Rebbe says, even when God helps us, there's two ways. This is the way Hashem, so to say, acts like a yoetz, like an advisor, that kind of comes down in a way that the person could receive it and internalize this kind of inspiration from God. And sometimes you get inspired, or there's a help that comes from God that's way above you. So here the Rebbe is actually turning the harshness of a situation of a judge and an advisor to actually in a uplifting moment of avodah, where the person wants to be able to reach higher in their avodah. So the Rebbe says that this difference between the judge and the advisor is in the first way we look at it as with the person who uses their own abilities, which is like the person who's advised, or the person is given a higher power from Hashem to kind of get out of a situation, like an inspiration for tshuva that comes from above, like the judge. And there it says within the inspiration from above, there's two levels. One that you could connect to, kind of God's holding you from under your armpits, you're kind of there, and He's picking you up. And then there's the way that God pushes, holding your hands and just lifting you up. It's not that you're not internalizing the strength. It's a total power that just pulls you out. So sometimes God gives us an inspiration and a power and a help that's way above us, like a judge. And it's also, we could say, that the siyua, that the kind of help that comes from the avodah of the person themselves, there's two levels. So we have, like you said, there's the sheftayach, there's the judges, the rule of Torah that gives a person strength to do his or her avodah in a way that's above us. Torah, when you do a mitzvah, you're able to connect to things just because this is the power of the mitzvah, which is much greater than the person. And there's the yotzayach, the advisor. There's also the idea of the advice where a person feels that the mitzvahs that they do is not just I'm doing something that's so much greater than me, but because it's God's mitzvahs, it uplifts me, or it gives me a power to do avodah, to do service. But I connect to the benefit of the mitzvah. That's like the advisor. The Rebbe says this is going to answer the question we had. Why, when it comes to judgment, which the Rebbe now describes, judgment is a kind of a higher power that's not so much connected to the person, whether it is in a judgment ruling or in our service of God, kind of a light or a lift up that we can't really internalize. It's just the God's pasha pulling us out. He's just lifting us out. And there God says, Kibir Rishayna, as things started. And the Yoatzim, when it comes to the way things are more internalized, whether it's in our avodah ourselves or how God inspires us, but in a way, or the mitzvahs, how we connect and we understand, meaning we come one in mind and heart with what we're doing. That's kibat chila, the beginning. So there's the beginning or the head, so to say. Achilak ben Rishayna v'tchilahu, Rishon dimiikarak mashma. So it's shezehu oish yerchelias koidim as chasinin. Mashenkin tchila moira as chasinin b'poyel. The Rebbe says that one of the differences between Rishon means the first, and the beginning. So Rishon is the Mikar Mashma. Rishon means even could be, this is before something started. This is how things are. This is the beginning of, this is where things are at the beginning. It doesn't have to start happening. It's just weird. This is like when you walk into a room where everything's set. It's there. This is the opening, how things start. And Tchila means the beginning and actually how things start to be, in the beginning, how things started to move. There's a very fine little difference here. This is the difference when things come from above. That's what the Rebbe is saying. Why do we use the word? The Rebbe is saying a deep idea here. Why do we use when it comes to when we're so to say being empowered totally?
Rabbi, you were frozen there for a second, Rabbi.
How far back?
Probably about 15 seconds, maybe.
So the Rebbe is saying like this: that what is the difference between the judges and the advisors? The judges is all about, it's not about you. You're being lifted up. You're being given the power to do. So that's the way something would be B'Rishon in the beginning, because you're not involved yet, or almost not involved in the whole time. It's all coming from above. So therefore, Rishon is like the setting of how it is. But Tchila is how things start to move. And because we're talking about you, when it comes to advice, we're talking about how you're involved and you internalize the message, so to say. So this is why it's called Tchila, the beginning, as opposed to the opening. Okay. This is the difference between our judges in the opening, so to say, or your advisors in the beginning. Shagam kefisha Shoftim Yoatzim hayu pam yesh nachilek ikri b'neim hamudgash b'shini haloshin kib'rishayim kibatchila. The Rebbe says even the way it was in the beginning, so to say, when we had judges in the times of the temple, means before the destruction, there was a difference between the way things were, so to say, in the way of a judge and the way of an advisor. The Rebbe says, Kivan shebepu'ulas hashayfet nimtza b'adgasha b'ikr mitzis hashayfet. Again, when it comes to the judge, the main, so to say, personality over here is the judge. When a person, what the Rebbe is doing over here is he's taking something that is seemingly just about a judicial system, about, so to say, two ideas connecting, the judge giving a ruling to the person being judged or a situation being judged, to a method of how a person's going about in their service of Hashem. And in the service of Hashem, there's the person who's serving, and there's the service that's getting done. When you have the emphasis on the Shofet is the judge, meaning that it's all about the judge, because the judge, so to say, the help from above, from God, he's the one who's dictating how things are. You're not really involved, you're just following along. Like a judge gives a ruling, you do what the judge says. And like we said before, the whole idea of a judge is that you're totally bottled, you nullify to the judge. So here, the emphasis is that it's all about God, how he's empowering us. We don't feel ourselves involved at all. We just feel like we're kind of going through the motions. Because in one way, there's something very high over here. Because it's coming from God, it's coming from such a high place. Like we said, the judge is much higher. So therefore he says, when it comes to the judge's effect, it's all about the judge. And in our case, what the Rebbe is saying it's alluding to is the idea of Hashem. It's all about the power Hashem gives us to perform. Like sometimes you have a person who's out there, and he or she realizes that it's really, I'm way overperforming for my abilities. A person could sometimes see that in their reach in life, in their effect, how they're doing things, they see this is not me. I'm a quiet, shy person. I would never be able to be so effective, so powerful, so inspiring. If a person has an honest conversation, says it's not me. Mamish, God has uplifted me to above my what I would assume is my regular abilities in performance. And it's all about the Shofet. It's all about the judge who empowers me to do. And the reason why you're able to have that connection is because, like it says before, you're bottled. You nullify yourself to the judge. It's like coming as a command from above. This is how it has to be. And it's not so much about, like I said before, how able is the receiver to receive the judgment. In this case, we're not talking about just judgment as a ruling, but in this case, we're talking about judgment as an ability. The judge is making us, so to say, is enabling us to perform on such a much higher level. It's not so much, so to say, God chose us to do something. It's because God decided it. And he didn't say, oh, this person's the most qualified person. I decided this person's going to get it done. Not so much the focus on the keli, on the vessel who's receiving the blessing. So therefore, there's a difference. The change is, the first is the ruling, the empowering moment. And now the person who's being given that ruling, so to say, or empowerment, has to act on it. That's why it says that the judge is from the opening, because the focus here is on the judge. And the judge is before it starts happening, the moment of empowerment. And then when do things start happening? That's when the person listens to what the judge says or acts on the inspiration of the judge. Shashiva, who that what have you returned to? You return to a situation of empowerment from the judge, notwithstanding of where you're holding. It's not about the keli. It's not about you. So to say, what is happening here is that the judgment gave an empowerment, and for whatever reason, he chose to give it to you. When it comes to the advisor, an advisor has to, so to say, transform the person from within. Here it's all about the person who's receiving the advice. Like we said, with the emphasis on the advisor is able to inspire and to give advice for the person to internalize the advice. So therefore it's not about how the open, if you're talking about where do we start looking at the focus, where's the focus of the beginning? The focus is when the person given the advice starts to act on it, because it's all about the person receiving the advice. The Rebbe is saying an amazing idea over here. Rishon is, like I said, is before things start. God gave it an empowerment. That's the emphasis. And the acting on it is only the result of that. So therefore it says Rishon, but the Tchila, what we're looking at over here, is if the emphasis is that God empowered us, and we connected to it, so then when do we start seeing what's happening over here is not the advice that was given, but how the person starts acting on the advice. Here we're talking about the receiving person. And one of the conditions is that the person who's listening to the advice has to be a receptacle. Otherwise, the advisor is not giving good advice. If I can't internalize and connect it, then it's not a relationship between an advisor and a person being advised. And not only that, when the person gives the advice, a smart advisor has to know how to advise the person in such a way that the person could receive the advice properly and internalize it and accept it. And the Rebbe says the fact that the person is able to give the advice and the person's receiving the advice shows that something's already happening. It's happening on the person giving the advice. Because he's ready, she's ready to listen. And the idea over here is, like I said, when the person advises someone, it's just revealing the inner powers you have. When a person gives someone, although the person may not be receptacle to it, whatever, like the judge just gives a ruling, doesn't have to have a connection to you. So you're not revealing something, you're giving something that the person didn't have before. And in Chassidus, The Rebbe's going to go on. We have a long talk ahead of us. We have to stop over here soon. But what the Rebbe is going to get into, that is, there's what we say in Chassidus, yesh b'zeh ma she'ein b'zeh. Each one has its virtue, because at the end of the day, we're limited. So if the siyua, this is one of the rules of Elul. This is very much connected to Elul. This is the whole idea of anila dodi v'dodi li. That when the Maimarim and the Rebbe explains what's the difference between anila dodi v'dodi li of Elul and v'dodi li of Rosh Hashanah. So the Rebbe says Elul is both. There's the siyua. There's what the king in the field. By the king being in the field, the king is being approached. We have a connection to it. The idea of the king being in the field is that we should feel that we have a relationship to the king. The king is not sitting on his throne when we feel so distant from him. The whole point is the Yoatzim, the idea of the advice, the connection, that the king is empowering us to make the choice to go greet him. The king is showing us a radiant face to encourage us that we should choose to go greet him. So that's the Anila Dodi, the Siyua, the inspiration that comes from above, is just, so to say, God pushing us along. So we should show all our strengths. But so therefore, that's the virtue of the idea of Yoetz, of advisor, is to uplift ourselves from within to that we should reach our full potential. But the idea of a doidi li, which is the Rosh Hashanah, as the Rebbe explains in the Maimarim, the idea of doidi li, my beloveds, to me, that's above down. That's like the judge. That's why it's Yom Hadin, the day of judgment. There, it's that the inspiration coming from above is so great that we're not a receptacle to it. It's not because of qualities we have. Like a judge gives judgment, notwithstanding if the person wants to hear it or not. And that's how to the inspiration that God gives us in such a way is so therefore that and there's, like I said, yesh b'zeh ma she'ein b'zeh. Each one has its virtues. Because there's the maila of a person uplifting themselves from within to reach your true potential. And because it's only your potential, and it's much more limited and smaller. And when the king decides to give you from above, he's giving you without any limitations. Like the judge doesn't have to consider whether you're going to like it or not, what he has to say. And you may not be a receptacle to what he has to say. God's going to give us such blessings and such light. V'dodi li, my beloveds, to me, whether I want to receive it or not, or whether I'm able to receive it or not. So the actual level is much higher, because you're getting something that's beyond you. But if it hasn't transformed you, hasn't internalized you. So when we have the combination of the two, when we've reached the depth that we could reach within ourselves, that's Elul. Then we come even to get a higher inspiration, Medodi Li, the Sarusa de Leila, the awakening from above that's beyond us. So then we have both things. We have Shofteinu and we have Yoetzim. We have both the elevation of within. We reach our own max, and then we get lifted up even higher from Hashem. Right, everyone. This is the rest of the Sicha. Obviously, has to be learned on our own. I want to wish everyone a good Shabbos, a good Chodesh. I'm not sure what happened to Shana. I guess she jumped off. Laila Tov, and take care. Thank you for joining.